Welcome to Fasken's 16th Annual Global Mining Group Seminar Series. My name is Virginia Schweitzer, and I'm part of the Fasken Global Mining Group. I'm a partner and the co-managing partner of Fasken's Ottawa office. Today's webinar, Recent Developments for Critical Mineral Exploration and Development in Arctic Countries, is the fourth in our series of 12 seminars this year. A link of all of Fasken's PDAC events can be found underneath the video window. As you view the info slide on the screen, I'd like to provide a land acknowledgement. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis have been present in Canada for thousands of years. These Indigenous peoples have a profound and ongoing attachment to this territory. At Fasken, we recognize that we have a role to play in the ongoing process of reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities here and elsewhere in Canada. We have embarked on the reconciliation journey by adopting a plan with the overall purpose of contributing meaningfully to reconciliation. Now I will turn it over to my colleague, André Durocher, to introduce today's speakers.
Thank you, Virginia. My name is André Durocher. I'm Counsel in Fasken, Montreal office, where I practice in the area of environmental law. I'm joined by my fellow panelists, first from Finland, Casper Herler, who's a partner with the law firm Borenius in Helsinki. Casper is a strategic advisor to major industries, natural resources, and energy corporations. He supports clients on significant strategic projects and investments, drawing on his experience as his law firm managing partner. He teaches environmental law at the University of Helsinki and is widely recognized as Finland's leading mining lawyer. Ramona Monroe is a partner with Stoel Rives and she is based in Anchorage, Alaska. She's a leading advisor on Alaska's land and mineral matters. She represents natural resources companies in major transactions and on compliance issues. She's highly experienced in oil and gas and mineral title issues. She was recognized a few years ago as Alaska's Advocate of the Year. Now, my friend and partner, Mariage, is in Montreal's office. He specializes in securities, corporate law, and mining law. He represents mining companies throughout the discovery, sale, and development of mineral deposits in Canada and internationally. He is consistently recognized as one of the country's leading mining lawyers. He has been named Lawyer of the Year several times in the repertory Best Lawyers. He is currently serving as chairman of the board of CIDEX, a key financier of exploration projects in the province of Quebec. And now to our discussion. In order to give some structure to the discussion, we have drafted a few questions, and I will ask Ramona to answer first, and then Finland, and then Canada. Now that we have a new administration in the United States and in Canada, at least for the last year, we have noticed perhaps a lack of enthusiasm, to put it mildly, with respect to the energy transition. Is it true? Is it a good way of describing it? And do you see that in the three countries? Does that impact on mining and mining especially for critical minerals? Ramona?
Thank you, André. In the United States, there was a lot of support for the energy transition and renewables until the current administration took office in early 2025. And since that time, we've seen our government policies moving away from renewable energy, but we're still seeing strong support for mineral development, and in fact, probably increased support for mineral development. As you may know, on day one of the Trump administration, our president issued an executive order called Unleashing Alaska's Extraordinary Resource Potential, indicating his strong support for resource development in Alaska and in the Arctic. The Fraser report in 2025 also ranked Alaska #1 for mineral potential and #3 for overall investment attractiveness. So we're seeing a large surge in interest in mineral exploration and development in Alaska. Alaska is somewhat unique among the United States. Not only are we the only Arctic state, like all Arctic areas, we have very high energy demands and very high energy costs. We suffer from a lack of infrastructure. Vast areas of the state are not accessible other than by airplane and boat. And we have remote communities scattered all across the state. These communities often are living a hybrid subsistence lifestyle. So along with their subsistence practices, they're using cell phones, they're using motorized transportation, and yet they don't have access to affordable energy. And so in Alaska, wind turbines, a single wind turbine can be a game changer for a remote community. Micronuclear is looked to as a promising potential solution to some of our energy issues in remote areas, both for remote resource projects and for remote communities. And so I think that in Alaska, in the Arctic region of the United States, you see both support for continued renewable energy where it's available and can be implemented affordably. Reliance on traditional energy supplies. We have a lot of oil, gas, and coal in Alaska, but a lot of support for renewable energy at the same time. On a bigger scale across the United States, I think the population will continue to support the energy transition, even though our government policies are not focused in that direction right now. And so we'll have to see what the next administration brings. But for right now, less focus on energy transition, but increased focus on mineral development.
Casper?
Thank you. With respect to the question, I think there is still a lot of enthusiasm around the energy transition in Finland and the Nordics as well, more largely. And that has to do with that Finland is seeking new ways of adding growth to the economy. And some of the strengths of Finland are that Finland has always kind of basically, because of the emphasis on kind of building on resilience and security, been investing a lot in infrastructure. So differently with many other parts of Europe, Finland has the best grid in Europe. And is also able to transport vast amounts of electricity from the north to the south, which is not the case for the other Nordic countries, like Norway, divided by fjords, making it very difficult to kind of transfer. And that has also led to that both Sweden and Norway have different pricing areas, whereas Finland is one single pricing area. Last year, Finland had the most negative priced electricity hours in Europe. And that has to do with a vast investments in onshore wind that has been market-based for quite some time already. And so a strong grid and a significant add of cheap onshore wind has led to that Finland has fairly low electricity prices. And that is something that the society and economy wants to kind of build growth on. And that has sort of led to a large interest for power to X type of solutions, sort of green hydrogen and e-fuels projects, and also sort of being able to refine battery materials and be active throughout the whole battery value chain, from the minerals to precursor and cathode active materials and battery cell productions. That's kind of been a very coherent strategy for Finland. But minerals and mining, where Finland is in a way a jurisdiction in Europe which has very actively developed the mineral resources for the past 2 decades, I would say. Finland is kind of in a different position than many other European EU countries that are just kind of starting to create resilience and resource security. But it's kind of a bit twofold approach. While minerals are sort of seen as a source of growth, it's also something which kind of causes certain sort of social licensing type of tensions. There's a couple of legacy projects that have kind of given rise to some sort of questions among the population on mining. But there's a lot of work that has been done on trying to do mining sustainably in Finland, and standards have risen quite significantly. But maybe we can get back to that when we talk about permitting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Frank?
Thanks, André. Well, lack of enthusiasm. I think that depends from what angle you look at it, honestly. If we consider the electric vehicle market as part of the energy transition, sales of EVs have gone in 2025 plummeted somewhere between 40 to 60% across Canada and in my province, Quebec. Obviously, the main cause of that is the reduction or cancellation of government subsidies to assist in the purchase of EVs. So obviously, I think we can definitely say there was a lack of enthusiasm on our governments to continue subsidizing the purchase of EV vehicles, and that obviously has an effect on the critical minerals needed to supply that chain. That said, I think all experts on that front will agree that, this is nothing but a minor speed bump, no pun intended, but nothing but a minor speed bump in an overall trajectory that shows EV vehicles will continue to increase. And although this is a temporary shift, I think that will obviously have an effect on the energy transition and obviously investments related to energy transition. And I'll get into that a bit later. But the EV market and the drop in EV market, and probably in the US as well, Ramona, I don't know about Finland, but at least in North America, that's dramatically affected investments in renewables. But if we look at other aspects of the renewable energy sector, I'm not an expert in that field, but I don't think there's a lack of enthusiasm, and that most indicators indicate an increased investments in this sector. Looking at the Canadian government's efforts, for example, Canada's looking to boost investments through notably with programs such as the Smart Renewables and Electrification Pathways programs, which was launched in 2021. It's a $4.5 billion program designed to support deployment of grid modernization, energy storage, and renewable energy technologies in every region of Canada. There are also other measures or institutions, federal institutions at the federal government level, which aim to support, the renewable energy development. So if you couple the program, the SREP's program of $4.5 billion and look at the efforts of the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, which has committed $10 billion in clean energy financing across the country. The federal government also announced various tax credits in the sector, notably the 15% clean electricity investment tax credit applicable on capital costs, notably for new equipment for wind, solar, hydro, tidal, geothermal, nuclear, stationary energy storage, which was becoming more and more important, non-fossil fuel related, of course, and interprovincial transmission lines, which is becoming increasingly important. So we may get a sense, overall that there is a lack of enthusiasm given the attention and spotlight that's put on the EV market and on EV sales. There's been a 35% decrease in EV spending in 2025, according to Bloomberg. But the reality is, I think $33.4 billion were invested in Canada last year on renewable energy projects. That's a pretty significant number. Again, according to Bloomberg. That's down about close to 9% compared to 2024, but that's mostly caused by the drop in the EV market. So overall, if you look at the rest of the clean energy, I would say that renewable energy is not suffering for a lack of enthusiasm, and it's only a question of time before the EV market comes back, and then all numbers will be green. Instead of in the red.
Thank you. So I'd like to move now to foreign direct investment. What is the current attitude in the United States, Finland, and Canada with respect to foreign direct investment in general and foreign direct investment from China, and especially from state-owned corporation? Is there a reluctance to allow Chinese companies, state-owned Chinese companies, or foreign entities to buy mines or to take possession of infrastructure that could be used to support mining in your countries? Ramona?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, André. Most of the investment that we see in Alaska and in the US is coming from Canadian and Australian companies. I don't typically get inquiries from Chinese companies or Chinese-backed companies, and I think that the government would be very opposed to seeing that, but it's just not the reality of what we're seeing. I think that the investment that we do see from Canada and Australia, and the reason that a lot of the companies are traded on those exchanges has to do with some historic stock exchange rules that have changed in the US, but the industry is taking a while to catch up to that. And I'm sure there are other reasons as well. But we are seeing a large amount of increased investment, direct foreign investment from Canada and Australia that I think is tied to the US policies being much more supportive of mining in the United States than they have been in the past. We have both our critical minerals list and a strategic minerals list, and it's commonplace to find graphs that show how many of the minerals on those lists the US is reliant on, X% of imports from foreign countries, and this sentiment that we need to control our own destiny by having our own mineral production and not be beholden to other countries to sell us their minerals, particularly China. Of course, when the Chinese have put export restrictions on their minerals, it's brought more attention to that issue and heightened the concerns and the focus in the United States. And so the US government has gotten much more favorable viewpoint positions on projects in the United States. And I wanted to give just a few examples of how the government is providing financial support to projects in Alaska. And kind of tying back to your first question about the energy transition, We have a project, the Graphite Creek project, which is a very, very large graphite deposit. Of course, graphite is a large component of EV batteries, but it has many other uses as well. And so Graphite One, the sponsor of that project, received a $37 million grant from the Department of War under the Defense Production Act. They also have been promised potential financing from the Export-Import Bank of up to $2 billion. It's a very interesting project. They have this large deposit in Alaska that is proposed to be developed into a mine, but they are also proposing a processing facility to be built in the United States to take that all the way from extraction from the ground to the final product to be marketed. Because, of course, processing capacity is another issue in the U.S. that we have exported historically most of that processing, and we don't have the facilities and the technology here today. So Graphite One proposes to solve that by building a plant in the U.S. and developing that technology to deliver the final product. A couple other quick examples. U.S. Antimony received a $245 million sole source contract to supply the National Defense Stockpile with antimony. There's been a lot of federal government interest in antimony in Alaska. Alaska produced antimony during the prior wars for the United States, and those deposits were never depleted. They were just abandoned when the war ended, and so there's a large resurgence in antimony activity here, and a lot of that investment is coming from overseas. And then my last example, Trilogy Metals received a $35.5 million influx from the Department of War. And that's a very interesting project in that the federal government didn't give a grant, they bought 10% interest in the company. So the federal government now owns 10% of Trilogy Metals, which has a deposit in the Ambler Mining District that's copper and rare earths and some other things mixed in there. And the federal government has an option to buy 7.5% more of that company. So we're seeing a lot of federal government investment as well as the foreign investment flowing into the mining industry in Alaska. And I think that a lot of that foreign investment is being encouraged. They're seeing that the U.S. government is not only supportive, but investing in the industries and that grant money is available. And so we're seeing a lot more Canadian and Australian dollars flowing in, both in terms of acquiring mineral rights and then investing in exploration activities. And it's a trend that we've seen building for a number of years, but it has definitely increased in the last year with the new administration in office. Casper?
Thank you. Yeah, so to paint out the general framework, Finland is part of the European Union, and the European Union has tried to address strategic materials and trying to put up goals for increasing the Europe-based material production and recycling through the Critical Raw Materials Act, which is a regulation which is directly applicable on all the member states without implementation. So it's been in force for a couple of years now, trying to address sort of the strategic side of minerals for Europe. And with respect to Finland and the question, I think we haven't seen similar type of concerns regarding, for instance, Chinese and other holdings into the minerals and resources industry in Finland. We haven't had that much examples either, so we haven't really seen a Chinese activity in trying to acquire Finnish natural resources. And my assumption is that the operating environment might be a bit challenging, sort of with the sort of large emphasis on environmental performance and also a lot of social type of sort of aspects regarding the projects, which requires quite a lot of capabilities in the project development but what is interesting, I think, for the audience is that the Finnish government has set up a strategy to be present in all the different phases of the battery value chain. And they have developed a specific vehicle called Finnish Minerals Group, which is a state-owned mining company that has this sort of governmental strategy task to both be sort of active in the battery minerals mining, but then also through various joint ventures throughout the battery values chain. And Finnish Minerals Group has entered into JVs with Chinese companies. And what I think from a Finnish perspective is interesting there is that Finland at one point of time was really one of the world leaders in mobile telecoms technology, and went into China and had to kind of license the Finnish know-how to the Chinese with respect to telecoms. And now we see kind of this reverse movement where we have Chinese sort of EV capabilities being sort of joint ventured into Finland. So through FMG, basically making joint ventures with Chinese producers, kind of bringing that technology in order to kind of get a better grip on that sort of production. Obviously, it might also be about sort of the Chinese trying to kind of secure positions in manufacturing European-based EV battery materials in Europe. If there would be more trade restrictions between Europe and China in that space. But so the government has recently made some amendments into the mining code, also kind of making security assessments part of the assessment of licensing of mines, but we have kind of really seen that. But in terms of access to land, new rules have been put in place because of multiple examples of sort of security threats, Russian-based entities and individuals acquiring properties close to military establishments and strategic electricity junctions and other similar type of things. So there's been a build up in legislation in order to be more sensitive about governing land purchases. And I think sort of in terms of infrastructure, something where the FDI legislation would be more stringent would be sort of acquisitions of holdings in grid and gas infrastructure. The Finnish government has been strategic in trying to secure holdings in the national TSO on the electricity side. So basically, when others have been selling, the Finnish government has been increasing its ownership in the national TSO on the electricity grid side, and already before the war broke out in Ukraine, the Finnish government bought out Gazprom's minority share from the Finnish gas TSO before all the signs were there. So that was kind of seen as a strategic move to hold 100% of all gas transmission in Finland. And building back to the last question, I think one of the drivers why Finland is focusing so much on green hydrogen is that that's seen as security, that you could use domestic electricity to basically be able to get more control of hydrocarbons produced through green hydrogen. Thank you.
Frank?
Thank you, Casper. You know, André, is there a direct link between foreign investment and national security or security concerns? I mean, absolutely. And, you know, when I started my career at the beginning of 2000, you know, up until the end of the bull market in 2011, or even before, you know, all the hype around critical minerals, you know, state-owned enterprises, Chinese companies were buying all sorts of interest in mining projects in Canada, or operating companies, operating mines in Canada, with no problem. Well, needless to say, that's changed dramatically. And I think a demonstration of that concern and the link for national security in critical minerals and direct foreign investment is the release last week of Canada's 81.8, almost 82 million defense industrial mineral strategy. We're securing, you know, supply chain for key inputs and goods such as critical minerals has been identified as one of the 5 pillars of that strategy. You know, the government of Canada is aiming, wants to expand the production, processing, stockpiling, and procurement of what we call defense critical minerals. Now, what are defense critical minerals? Well, they're the rare earth elements, cobalt, lithium, graphite, titanium, you know, and at the same time supporting coordinated action plan with its allies, the G7, European Union, etc. Because at the end of the day, we know the access to minerals is not what's the issue here. After that, it's the transformation, which the Chinese dominate immensely and largely. And that is, I think, one of the key elements of development of the Western world, is being able to put a hole in that domination that the Chinese now occupy in terms of transformation of critical minerals. Now, what other measures in Canada have been taken to limit foreign investment, or even stop foreign investment of SOEs, Chinese SOEs, for example? Well, you know, Canada seeks to protect acquisition of critical mineral Canadian businesses through, you know, various legislative measures, such as the most commonly known and referred to, which is the Investment Canada Act, where Canada will apply enhanced national security scrutiny to foreign investments in the critical mineral sector, particularly, of course, those involving state-owned enterprises, formerly designated as SOEs. Acquisition of critical mineral assets are only approved, honestly, on an exceptional basis or exceptional circumstances, with the potential for required divestitures, and I'll get into that a bit later. The government of Canada will review transactions regardless of the value for potential national security risks, such as control over supply chains, the size of the project, or the investor's tie to foreign governments. Investments by the foreign SOEs are generally viewed as contrary to Canada's interests and approved only in rare exceptional cases. The Investment Canada Act also allows for the review of minority investments, not just controlling interests, and can apply to foreign investments in entities outside Canada that hold Canadian critical minerals assets. An example of that is a Canadian company that has a mine or development project somewhere in Africa, but it's a Canadian company, or in Latin America. We've seen that happen. It's hit the press in Canada over the last couple of years. But I'll give you a more recent example. In 2022, the federal government intervened and ordered the divestiture of investments by 3 Chinese firms and Canadian headquartered companies that had actual or potential operations in lithium and certain cases other critical minerals. And these were minority investments, and the federal government directly intervened to order divestitures of these investments by these Chinese SOEs. It gives you a good example of the measures the Canadian government is willing to take under the Investment Canada Act to protect Canadian critical minerals, or Canada's access to critical minerals. I mentioned it. We've seen it on a few occasions. We, André, you know, at Fasken have accompanied Canadian companies that were acquired by foreign entities that had no operations in Canada, but had critical mineral projects outside of Canada. And we accompanied them through a successful process under the Investment Canada Act, where these projects or this sale was approved. I won't get into details, but I do remember one that even made headlines at Parliament, where the Prime Minister of Canada was directly questioned on that by the leader of the opposition for approving such a transaction. And that caused a ripple effect in Canada. And so all these measures right now are causing some kind of uncertainty in the market in terms of, well, where does Canada sit on these transactions? We've seen obviously recent transactions that have been approved, Teck and Glencore. And so what is the future lie ahead? What lies ahead? Time will tell. But you know, I think I've explained measures to which Canada is prepared to take to protect access to critical minerals in Canada.
If I may be allowed a follow-up question, Frank, Canada's Prime Minister has been to China recently. Do you see a possibility of relaxation of these rules going forward?
Maybe. I mean, we've opened the market to 49,000 Chinese EV vehicles in Canada. You know, that trip was already obviously not very well received in Washington by you know who. But you know, I think the relationship is warming up. Will that lead to softening of how Canada sees SOE investments in Canadian mineral projects? Possibly. Possibly.
I'm in Mexico right now, and in the bus, I've seen a BYD dealer. So I was wondering if it's possible that we will see BYD and other Chinese electric vehicles dealerships in Canada.
The problem, as a complement, as a follow-up answer to your question, Ramona talked about all the measures from a financial perspective that the government was putting in place to support. The federal government and provincial governments are doing the same. The problem we've had is that, you know, access to foreign direct investment in Canadian projects, especially with SOEs, has been refused, and there's been absence of access to capital in Canadian markets or even the US for mineral projects for a certain time. That is starting to shift right now, principally because of, you know, all the hype around precious metals. But you know, after the last bull market, you know, from 2012 to to the beginning of the pandemic, wasn't easy financing a project. So at the same time as that capital dried up, Canadian companies had difficulty financing their activities. So the federal government money just isn't enough to support the development of that chain. It's a step in the right direction, but it's not enough. And that's why we are seeing a lot of hype around, you know, Middle Eastern investment, you know, who the sovereign funds out of Saudi Arabia, out of the UAE, who are looking to invest massive amount of capital in mining to diversify their economy. And so that's certainly something that at least Canadian mining companies, having seen it myself, can attest to.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move to another question.
Comment what Frank just sort of elaborated on, just from a Finnish perspective. Will not take a lot of time, but I think what is sort of interesting looking at at Canada, and you mentioned a couple of examples which of acquisitions or basically mergers that have been allowed in the mineral space. But when I'm looking at Canada and the way you use your sort of FDI regime, you are pretty sophisticated. If you're kind of looking at what all measures were required to be put in place in order to accept, for instance, the Anglo-Czech merger, it's kind of a quite significant and sophisticated use of that regime, which we don't sort of see in my jurisdiction. That is sort of in that type of active involvement in requiring all sorts of things from the deals. We may see that on the European kind of competition law type of requirements, but not in the FDI space, at least so far. But it's kind of an interesting sort of point of reference on how you can use such a regime.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move to a third issue here. If you read the national strategies of Canada and the United States, there's a reference to the immensity of the territory, and with the immensity of the territory comes the problem of the infrastructure gap. Ramona, Frank, can you talk about it? And about Finland, don't think we could say that it is an immense territory, and you have alluded to the grid and the infrastructure. I'd like you to address, Casper, what lessons a country such as Finland can give to Alaska and to Canada. Ramona?
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Alaska is vast, and it does create a large infrastructure issue, as I alluded to previously. I do want to throw in that in addition to the infrastructure gap, there is a qualified workforce issue that's also a gating issue around minerals and extractive industries that I just want to flag. But large areas of Alaska are accessible only by plane or by boat, and for the northern half of the state, accessible by boat only in the ice-free summer months, as the Arctic countries are familiar. And so how do you navigate that? And Southeast Alaska, since I have this convenient map, let me just point for a second. That area of Southeast Alaska is not connected to the rest of the state by road. So even though it's in an ice-free region, you can only get there by boat or airplane year-round because there isn't a connecting road. So the infrastructure problem is very large, and we've come up with a couple of solutions that basically involve government support. So Alaska has a state economic development agency that has stepped in to help out. A couple of examples, probably the largest, most successful example is our Red Dog mine. It's a very large zinc producer. It's in the remote northwest portion of the state of Alaska. And the Economic Development Agency, when that project was proposed but not yet built and developed, stepped in and funded the construction of a road and a dedicated port facility to get that ore, that concentrate, exported from the state. So the Economic Development Agency issued bonds to raise funds to build those facilities, and then the mine pays tolls for the use of the facilities. Those tolls have retired the bonds and now continue to provide revenues to that agency to make other investments in the state. The port is iced in all winter long and includes very large storage facilities. The mine operates year-round, transports to the port year-round. The concentrate is stored at the port during all of the iced-in months, and then the ships come in and take all of that ore to the concentrate to the smelter during the ice-free months in the summer. So that's been a very successful project. It did require government involvement in funding the infrastructure to make it happen. We also have a proposed infrastructure project, the Ambler Road. I mentioned the Ambler Mining District earlier, very rich, well-known mining district that has been on the radar for many decades, but goes undeveloped for a lack of infrastructure. And so there is a proposed 211-mile road out to the mining district. It's also in Northwest Alaska, but nowhere near Red Dog Mine. Even Northwest Alaska is big. And so there's no interplay between the two projects. But the Ambler Road requires a right-of-way across federal land, state land, and native land in Alaska. And the federal right-of-way has been a problem for many, many years, where you go through the environmental review process, a license or an easement is issued, a new administration comes in and it decides to do additional environmental review, and so it suspended or revoked the permit that had been granted, undertook a bunch more environmental review, came to a different conclusion, and we've just had this back and forth whiplash over that road project and whether it's going to go forward or not. And so just on Friday, actually, the federal government announced that it will begin the process this week of transferring a very large portion of those federal lands to the state of Alaska. And then the state will be issuing the right-of-way for that road. And we're very optimistic that it will go forward. Again, that road is being proposed by our Economic Development Agency and the funding mechanisms that it has available, with the idea that it would be a toll road. It will be restricted use because the native villages in the region do not want public access into their remote villages. And so the idea is that it would be restricted to industrial use for the mine, which would pay tolls for the mines. I should say that district is anticipated to eventually have multiple mines operating in it that would pay tolls to pay for that infrastructure. Of course, there's going to be energy that needs to get to those mines. We move a lot of diesel fuel around in the state. The Donlin Gold Project, which is in a remote area of Southwest Alaska, has proposed a 200-mile natural gas pipeline to get energy supplies out to the mine and produce energy, which it then will share with some of the communities in that region. So infrastructure is a huge issue. Typically, we have found that government support helps bridge that gap, but occasionally there's a project that can fund the infrastructure that it needs, like the Donlin Gold Project. So that's what we've seen in Alaska to date.
Before we go to Casper, you've mentioned diesel for mining sites. Would there be an interest for small modular reactors?
There's a lot of interest in Alaska in having that technology develop and maybe even doing some of the testing here, because these remote areas are so starved for affordable energy that we would love to bring some micronuclear reactors into the state, both for our remote villages and for remote mining projects, and test them out and see if that's a viable alternative to solving some of the energy issues.
Casper?
Yeah, as you already alluded to, things are a bit different in Finland than the Nordics, and that has to kind of do with, of course, with size, but also with sort of geography. Finland is very high up north in comparison, but because of the Gulf Stream, the climate is very different. So Helsinki is at the 60-degree north, and a lot of our mining projects are north of the polar circle, so 67, 68 degree, with slightly different climate than in northern Canada and Alaska. But there's a scarce population is still something that kind of prevails. So the third of Finland, the northernmost third inhabits about less than 200,000 people. There's more reindeer there than people. So, but because of forestry, there's pretty good road infrastructure throughout the whole Finland. So that also makes exploration for mining and minerals much easier, because you can basically use those forestry roads everywhere throughout the country. But the good access also comes with other sort of land use and industries. So in Finland, there's a tension between tourism and mining. So whether those are kind of opposite to each other, or whether those can kind of work together is kind of an interesting thing. So mining and tourism can basically support each other, because the mining basically gives a lot of sort of capacity passengers to airlines, and then you can keep up the routes, and then you can bring in tourists, and mining can support the restaurants and the hotels during the down season, during summer, when the tourist wants to come in winter to see the aurora borealis and the snow and everything. So that's kind of a but kind of what type of learnings? Well, I think sort of, at least Finland has sort of had I think public policy have supported continuous investment into infrastructure and grids in particular. So the reason why electricity grids have received attention and investments in Finland is that we have never relied so much on gas, and that has a kind of a security reason, because we haven't wanted to be so dependent on Russia as a fossil fuel and gas source, but instead sort of use domestic electricity. So these kind of specific features are maybe something that lie behind. But yeah, a strong grid helps with electrifying and has also helped with being able to utilize onshore wind, which is really, but when you kind of get that industry running, it's a very cheap source of electricity. And when you add battery storage to it, you can kind of get away some of the volatility in the electricity grid. Thank you.
Thank you. Frank?
Is the infrastructure gap a problem? Definitely, yes. It's a huge problem in Canada. Two main reasons. The first one is the size of the territory. Now, what are we talking about when I say size of the territory? I mean, the Canadian Arctic covers approximately 40% of Canada's total landmass. That's over 2.6 million square kilometers. It includes about 75% of its coastline. And it consists of 3 northern territories, so Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, and northern parts of several provinces, such as my province of Quebec, including the 1.4 million Arctic square kilometer Arctic archipelago, which contains over 36,000 islands. So that gives you an idea of the size of the territory that we're dealing with. Now, the second is, so territory, second, the absence of critical infrastructure to support, the development of these regions. Ramona alluded to that too in Alaska. It's also a huge problem in Canada. So what are we trying to do about it? Well, right, there are 2 policy documents that the Canadian government has come out with, trying to, at least remotely, to a certain extent, address that issue. The first one is the Canadian Critical Mineral Strategy, which was released in 2022. And the most recent one is Canada's Foreign Arctic Policy, which was released in 2024. So one of the areas of focus of Canada's Critical Mineral Strategy is building sustainable infrastructure in the north. Let me read you an extract of the report. Canada's critical mineral sector has tremendous opportunities that remain underdeveloped. Critical mineral deposits are often located in remote areas with challenging terrain and limited access to enabling infrastructure, such as roads or grid connectivity. The cost implications of this infrastructure deficit discourage investments and hinder the socioeconomic development of local communities that welcome mineral development. It also increases the risks associated with economic and logistical feasibility, particularly with rising inflationary pressures and challenges in global supply chains. So it's not me that's saying that. This is taken directly out of the Canadian critical mineral strategy. So Canada, has clearly identified the lack of infrastructure as a nuisance to the development of critical minerals. Interestingly enough, that policy only contains one mention of the North or Arctic when touching upon the need to further develop transportation infrastructure as a strategic opportunity for economic growth. So Canada's sovereignty and national security, and also reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. So if we look at the Arctic foreign policy, Canada confirms its commitment to strengthening Arctic and Northern infrastructure and to closing infrastructure gaps with other regions of Canada to forge opportunities for economic development, to address reconciliation again with Indigenous peoples, to increase resilience and to contribute to Arctic defense and security. Remember, André, what we talked about in your first question about, the link and national security concerns. Well, obviously, the Arctic foreign policy directly addresses that. But, the term critical minerals is used only 6 times in the Arctic foreign policy, with no specific policy objective, other than to highlight it as a tool for economic development for the region. So what are the more common themes of these two policies? Reconciliation, sovereignty, and national security. As an example, in my province, the northern Quebec, which is known as the James Bay area, which is north of the 49th parallel, that region alone has tremendous infrastructure gap. That region alone is twice the size of France. So it gives you an idea of the humongous threat and gap that exists to enable us to successfully develop the critical minerals that are there. There are a bunch of, for example, hard rock lithium projects in northern Quebec that are developed. Problem is, there's no infrastructure to develop them. There are no roads. So that could represent close to maybe 40% of the transportation costs alone could go up to 40%. So it affects the feasibility of mining projects. So definitely something that, governments will need to take head on. And, we live in a federal system where federal government has its jurisdiction, the provinces have their jurisdiction, the territories. All these governments are going to have to come together to be able to develop that infrastructure. And, I'm seeing, Ramona, you mentioned that the federal government is transferring lands to the state, which is probably a good thing, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, the U.S. federal lands have the worst bulletin in terms of how long it takes to permit a mine, and I think we'll get into that later. But if there's no coordinated effort, it's just not going to happen. So,
thank you, Frank. This leads us to permitting. Permitting is described in all the policy papers, from the International Energy Agency to Canada to Europe and the United States. It's a big issue. It's an enormous issue. How big a problem is it? And what is really being done to reduce the delays? Ramona?
Thanks, Frank. Permitting is usually cited as the largest single impediment to mining in Alaska and in the United States in general. As Frank stated, Alaska was recently ranked as almost the slowest country in the world to issue permits for new mining projects. We often require permits from both the federal government and the state government. The federal government is where we really seem to get bogged down, because it's where our environmental review occurs under our National Environmental Policy Act. So a couple of things that are being done. Back in 2015, our federal government adopted what is called the FAST 41 project. FAST stands for Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. And the idea was to streamline the permitting process for large infrastructure projects. So initially, mining projects were not included in that. They weren't eligible, but that changed in 2021 when mining projects were added to the list of eligible projects. Nonetheless, our federal government at that time was not all that supportive of domestic mining projects, and it's an opt-in process. A project proponent has the ability to elect to apply to be part of the FAST 41 process, and mining companies were not jumping on the bandwagon to do that. But that changed early this year with the Trump administration coming in. And many mining projects have now opted into the FAST 41 process. It does not change our permitting process, but it creates predictability because it once you are in the process, you negotiate with the agencies a performance schedule that is obligatory for both the project proponent and the agencies that have to review the permits. And then it creates transparency and accountability because there's a federal permitting dashboard available online. It has the schedule. It tells where you are in the schedule and tracks each party's compliance with the schedule. There's also some potential funding for agencies that need to staff up to perform under that process. And so it has created a more active engagement and increased agency coordination. So that's one piece that's already in place to help deal with permitting. In addition, there are a number of proposed laws, and I want to just talk briefly about the SPEED Act. SPEED is an acronym for the Standardizing, Permitting, and Expediting Economic Development Act. This is intended to directly address the environmental review process and mend some of the problems that have developed in that process. It reduces the type of agency actions that are required to go through the environmental review process. It limits the effects, the environmental effects that have to be considered. This has been a large area of litigation and contention when large projects are being permitted. For example, do you have to look at the impact on climate change, even though it's a fairly remote impact and your project might be a very, very small component? So the SPEED Act would only require that you review those environmental effects that have a close causal relationship with the project. It would limit the agency's ability to rescind or alter completed environmental reviews, going back to the Ambler Road project that I talked about, where the administration different administrations kept reopening environmental review to take another look. It would make that much more difficult for an agency to do. And then what we really, really need in our country, it would impose some litigation reforms, a 150-day deadline to challenge a federal agency action, and then some timelines around court review and trying to get those decisions out. So that's the SPEED Act. It's proposed. It's been approved by our House of Representatives, but not yet by the Senate. So we'll see where that goes. There are other bills pending, but that seems to be the one with the most focus at this time. So we're working on it. I think the current administration understands the issue and is trying to help solve some of those problems that have kind of crept into the system over the years, but it's going to take some time and we're not there yet. Casper?
Thank you. Yeah, permitting is definitely kind of one of the most critical obstacles for sort of expedited mineral development in Finland and the Nordics, and you see it both on the exploration side, so as well as in mining. So a pretty complex set of permits and required for putting a mine in place. So definitely working with mining, you get good training of the whole spectrum of environmental and other kind of laws, because almost everything is sort of needed and required for a mining project. But sort of I think on the exploration side in the Arctic, one of the challenges is sort of this vast amount of nature conservation sites. So that typically limits operational time to the time where there's snow coverage. So if you drill on, for instance, protected bogland, you may drill for 2 months out of the 12 because of you need to have special conditions, and then once you have the snow coverage, soon the breeding season for the owls and eagles and everything kicks in. So you have quite a small window, which limits sort of operational time. Basically, all permits are appealed by NGOs to in mining to courts. So and that kind of creates very long timelines. And that's basically where the EU Critical Raw Materials Act brings new solutions, because part of these challenges have also been created by EU, so it takes EU to solve them. But the EU strategy for deregulating is not deregulating, but it's adding new regulations. So it's much easier politically in the EU to add a new layer of regulation on top of the existing ones than trying to kind of back away from the existing one. That's what we've seen with CRMA. So the directives on nature conservation and water framework and others that have caused sort of issues for mining projects are solved partially through Critical Raw Materials Act, which creates this binding framework, and what it contains is a 24-month timeline for permitting, but that's not the whole story, because there's many phases of authorization and zoning and others which are not within that 24-month time frame. There's a prioritization, requirement. So the governments need to offer a prioritization status if you are qualified as a strategic project. So the Commission selects once a year a number of projects to be strategic, and with that status, you're offered the benefits of in permitting. And at least in Finland so far, we have the first round of strategic projects out there. So we've kind of been able to see that courts, it really matters in courts that when you have this prioritization status and you have this national coordinating authority calling the courts and asking them for the statistics on how fast is this matter progressing, because they're reporting this to the EU Commission, it actually has effect. And then this sort of coordinating authority takes, at least in Finland, a very active role in trying, when you have several authorities, to try to make those to work together and try to solve issues. And it's much easier when you have a civil servant doing that rather than the company themselves trying to push forward the project. And then there's basically the signal of importance. So once you get that status, then it kind of is reflected in the permitting that this actually is of big importance. Then we try to build in voluntary compensation measures into projects in order to kind of try to mitigate. So I think that, but all in all, I would say that mining, at least in Finland, is the industry that, with the same rules applying on several different industries, mining is getting the toughest treatment. But of course, that has made mining companies, I would say, excel also in trying to do a better job. So the project and the prospects of trying to do mining sustainably, I think we've kind of gone a long way there. Thank you.
Frank?
Thanks, André and Casper. Well, firstly, I was listening to Ramona, and we need to do a better job at finding acronyms for our bills, our legislation. Yeah, the ones in the US are much more marketable than ours, which are boring. That's my first comment. And André, you'll remember when we were preparing for this session and we were reading, critical mineral policies and Arctic policies of different countries, we all came to the conclusion, as you mentioned, that permitting is listed in all of these as a challenge, as something that needs to be addressed. And Canada is no different than that. It's, again, just like infrastructure, it's a major issue and problem in Canada. Mining, if you couple the federal legislation, if you couple the provincial legislation, or the territories legislation in the mining space, mining is one of the most regulated industries across the country. And people don't seem to realize that. They a lot of times when you speak to people about mining, they think miners do what they want. It's the Far West, but people don't realize we are dealing with one of the most highly regulated industries in the country. And I presume that in the US it's no different. In Finland, Casper, you talked about it, probably no different. And you said something that really caught my attention. It's much more easier to add regulation than to subtract regulation, which is exactly what's happened in Canada over the past 30, 40 years. And, in Canada, from the initial discovery of deposit to the mine into production, it could take 15 to 20 years. I do not know anybody on this earth who think that's a reasonable delay, except maybe NGOs, but that's an editorial comment. Listen, especially since the presidential election in the US, it's become increasingly clear that permitting efficiency needs to be a key and strategic area of focus. So what's Canada done to attack this problem? Well, as I said, we live in a federal system. Most of the regulated part of the mining industry is a provincial jurisdiction. There are federal jurisdictions that can involve mining, but a lot of it is on the province or in the territories. But what's Canada done? Canada has introduced Bill C5 in 2025, the One Canadian Economy Act. See, in Ramona, I prefer something like fast or speed, but anyway, that's another issue. Which aims to accelerate infrastructure projects and reduce interprovincial barriers. That was introduced in June, enacted in Parliament. And that bill also enacted the Building Canada Act, allowing the federal cabinet to designate projects of national interest, such as pipelines, mines, energy grids, to receive expedited federal approval, aiming to significantly reduce the review timelines. Canada has announced projects of national interest recently. I remember there was a big G7 meeting in Toronto on October 31st. For example, Nouveau-Mont Graphite's graphite project in Quebec was designated as a project of national interest, hoping to streamline the permitting process. We'll see where this goes. This is all new legislation. The proof is in the pudding, as we say. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But the bill did receive increased criticism from Indigenous leaders and environmental groups who argue that it bypasses necessarily consultations, undermines treaty rights, and weakens environmental oversight. Again, the jury is still out on that, but we'll have to see if this new legislation will survive the courts, because there will undoubtedly be court challenges to this new legislation. And we'll see if it survives the passage of time. But it's too early to tell, or even to confirm the efficiency of these measures implemented in this bill, as they're all fairly recent. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Provincial authorities have also tried to do the same thing. I have in my hand a C5, Bill C5 in Quebec, which is a National Assembly's attempt in Quebec to streamline permitting process. Right now, there are hearings before Parliament right now. Yesterday, the Quebec Mining Association testified before the parliamentary committee to give its comments on this, and also has tries to have similar effects as Bill C5 of the federal government. But as is the case for that legislation, it's still really too early to tell if these measures will be successful. But one thing for sure, again, this is one of the most highly regulated industries in Canada, and every expert agrees that these delays are too long And if we are serious about critical mineral strategy and developing our own infrastructure, these delays will have to be shortened significantly. If not, we're just going to miss the parade, and China will continue its dominance in the field.
Thank you, Frank. In the interest of time, I think we'll merge question 5 and question 6. If you read the critical mineral strategy of Canada, of the United States, and the Nordic countries, you see commonalities. At least you see the words wealth of mineral resources. You see the words rich geological endowment. But as Frank has pointed out, yes, we do have these resources, but there needs to be a confirmation program. You need to really pinpoint where these resources are and what we can do to actually take them. So what works? What are the grants, tax credits, and other policy tools that work to encourage exploration and development?
Thanks, Frank. So Alaska is known to have 49 of the 50 critical minerals. We've now expanded that list to 60 critical minerals, and we know that we have occurrences of more than 60, or more than 50, I'm sorry. But the question is, are they commercial, and how do you do the exploration to demonstrate that? And I think we've touched on the answers: predictable, effective permitting in reasonable timeframes, government support policies that support infrastructure projects and mining projects. And the other one that I touched on earlier, knowledgeable and well-trained regulators. You know, the mining industry is seeing a shortage of trained workers for jobs in mining, and the same is true of our regulators. And without regulators to with knowledge and experience to process the permits, make reasonable, rational, defensible decisions in appropriate timeframes, it just is really going to be an impediment to the industry. So I think government policies need to support permitting, infrastructure, and attraction and retention of a qualified workforce. Also, on the grants and tax credits, we've talked about examples of funding mechanisms. Royalty rates are always an issue. Most of the extraction and exploration in Alaska is on public land, either state land or federal land. Our federal lands do not have royalties. That is constantly challenged, and there are regular bills to add royalties on our federal lands, and our state lands have a small royalty, which is also under attack, that the mining industry does not contribute enough financial support to our state government. So continuing to keep our royalty rates reasonable and appropriate, and recognizing the huge amount of capital that it takes to take a mineral project, an exploration project, into a mine and not saddle them with additional financial burdens is an appropriate and needed policy. The state of Alaska does have a 3.5-year exemption on our mining tax. So a company that opens a new mine has a 3.5-year exemption from our mining taxes in recognition of that. So those are some needs that I see, and some things that we're already doing to address some of them.
Casper?
Thank you. Yeah, Finland hosts a lot of the critical raw materials that are listed on the EU Critical Raw Materials Act. And when looking at exploration statistics, the expenditure on exploration is not that large in a global setting, but in a Nordic setting, I think Finland has the most diverse exploration sort of activity. So it's not just sort of one large major that does a lot, but more diversely, a number of companies. Having said that, the financing comes from abroad, so Canada, Australia, and other stock exchanges. So it's really hard to raise that type of risk money from the Finnish investor base. Is exploration supported or subsidized? Not at the moment. The Critical Raw Materials Act, besides the permitting, element, and the policy part of it also should contain some sort of financing arm, but we're kind of still waiting for that to materialize. The clean transition, EU state aid programs, to the extent we're talking about battery minerals and critical raw material, critical minerals that can be used for and are critical for the energy transition, those subsidy programs also are available for mining projects. And the Finnish government has put in place a tax subsidy where you can get this investment tax credit for up to 150 million euros, where you can basically, once you're up in production, you deduct that tax credit from your taxes. And that is sort of attractive to projects which are close to being licensed and entering into production to basically get your operational costs down and sort of your profitability of the project up. But I think what we would need to see is some sort of support schemes for exploration. I have some in mind, but hope to talk more about that in a year or two, hopefully. But because of the licensing being so and permitting being so slow, I think countries like Finland would need to subsidize, help out the exploration industry with the financing, because otherwise faster jurisdictions will kind of make your money give better returns in exploration. So I think that's kind of one of the messages for the regulators that and policies that's a reason to fund exploration also. Thank you.
Thank you. Frank, in 4 minutes.
Okay. Well, listen, as I stated earlier, to answer one of your questions, I mean, Canada's critical mineral strategy clearly states that critical mineral sector remains underdeveloped, right? And, a common themes to all the jurisdictions that are present here today. No exploration, no discovery. No discovery, no mine. Simple as that. And, and Canada will look at it from a perspective of that exploration as a whole or exploration in the north, in the Arctic. Let's talk about overall statistics. The latest official statistic from Natural Resource Canada confirmed $2.9 billion in exploration across the country, of which 1.4 billion was devoted to exploring for critical minerals and close to 1.5 for precious metals. We're looking at it in the north. What are the common areas of challenge? Well, we talked about it during this presentation. Deposits located in remote areas, little or lack of or no infrastructure to access the project. Exploration costs that skyrocket. I'll give you an example. I talked about James Bay, north of the 49th parallel in Quebec, which is twice the size of France. It could cost up to 5 times more to mobilize a drill rig in that over there as it would in a place where you have access to infrastructure. Gives you an idea of how the exploration costs skyrocket when you're dealing. So imagine the vast Arctic, Canadian Arctic. I talked about how big the territory is. I'm looking at a map of Canada's critical minerals, and you could see it. Very few mines, many exploration projects, no access to road or infrastructure. If we want to develop those things, what can we do to assist these companies? Well, we have to continue supporting exploration, continue with resource tax credits, enhance resource tax credits when exploring for critical minerals. Maybe look at enhanced tax credits for remote areas. The flow-through share regime in Canada is also a very big market. The flow-through share regime, and you get a bonus when you explore for critical minerals. That represented $1 billion raised in 2024 to support exploration. Obviously, different grants and subsidies from the various governments and government agencies, making sure that public databases on geological potential mineralization are available to the companies coming in to explore. The governments of Canada and the provincial governments usually do a very good job at making sure that information is public. And efficient capital markets. Canada is known to have a very sophisticated capital market to support mining. Unfortunately, it's had a tough time in the last couple of years. When I started practicing, 60% of mining companies were listed in Canada. This was a 2000, 2001. Today, it's 42%. So there's been a drop. Why is that? Because capital markets in Canada have been less efficient to support mining. That needs to change. Why? Because that we support development companies, juniors to explore. And efficient capital markets is really a key, is also to allowing these companies to raise capital to further develop their projects. And without an efficient capital market, it's going to be very difficult to finance exploration that will make the discoveries for the energy transition. It's as simple as that. I have other notes, André, but you gave me 4 minutes, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. If you can just in a few seconds tell our audience what is the number one issue that you will look for this year? Ramona.
Permitting reform.
Casper.
I think sort of encouraging exploration, I think.
Frank.
Sorry, I was on mute.
What is the
I'm with Ramona. Permitting reform. It's the most significant challenge to being serious about attacking critical minerals in the energy transition.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. Our next PDAC webinar is entitled Overcoming Nuclear Power Supply Chain Challenges from Uranium Mining and Beyond. This webinar will take place tomorrow, February 25th, beginning at 1 p.m. You can sign up for this upcoming session through the PDAC events button under the video window or by visiting the events section of fasken.com. We hope that you can join us for our next session, and thank you for being with us. And thank you for my friend panelists. Bye.